hope you'll practice the basic techniques of watercolor painting. Practice is the best route to success. Now I'd like to share with you some of the special effects of watercolor painting, and I call them the sexy techniques, but there are so many of them and new ones are being invented all the time. Are you ready? Let's go. The first technique I'm going to discuss is salt, and there are many types of salt that you can use. Sea salt or larger salt will make a larger mark, and regular salt, of course, will make a smaller mark. I find myself mixing salt sometimes to get a varied look, but what you have to do with salt is use wet paper and wet paint, and you put the salt down. So what I'm doing right now is just wetting the paper, and then I'm loading my brush with very dilute paint. Just going to bring the paint out here. And I want a lot, you want to use a lot of paint for this. It should be pretty viscous and thick. So there we go. Now let's get some brown, some sepia, and put it in there. Lighter colors such as yellow and orange don't work very well. So that's something to remember. Now you have to lay the salt down while this is wet. So I'm just going to use some regular iodized salt here and sprinkle it on. This is wonderful for rust looks, textures, furs, oceans, sand. And the really important thing to remember is that this has to dry naturally and flat, while the salt granules suck up the moisture and the pigment into them. They'll leave a little white spot where each granule is. It's also wonderful for snow and starry nights. So let's let this one dry, and we are going to move on to alcohol in a minute. One other thing about this is that you must get the salt off your painting before you can frame it. And I take it outdoors so it doesn't get into my paints or any of my other equipment. So let this dry naturally, and now on to alcohol. This one we will have to dry as soon as we have this where we want it. So you want to use wet dilute paint, fairly viscous, probably not quite as thick as I needed on the salt. And this is really good for rocks, moss, lichens. And it's another technique where you use it on the wet paint, but I do actually have to let it dry just a smidge. So today I'm using 70% isopropyl alcohol. You want to wait until a little bit of the glisten leaves. And what I'm going to do is fill my fingers and splatter this alcohol, and then I'm going to dry it with my hair dryer right here. And of course I don't want to get on the salt, which is still working its way through. So here we go. I'm going to moisten my fingers. I'm going to splatter. Splatter, splatter, splatter. I'm not getting quite enough. Oh, there we go. You want to dry it quickly. And if you don't have quite enough, you can keep using a little bit more until you get just what you want. The next technique is spray. We're just going to paint wet paint onto the paper, and we're going to spray with a spray bottle. This time we'll use green. You can use any color. I do think a darker, juicier color is probably better for this. So I'm just going to overlap, and I'm going to bring in some of the blue and overlap here. And again, we're going to wait for the glisten to just leave, and then we will spray with our water bottle, and we've got to dry this right away. Now, while that is waiting to dry, we're going to go over here to masking fluid and talk about that for just a minute. We can do two at one time. So I did use some incredible white mask. For this, I used a glass pen, and you want to be really careful what you apply masking fluid with. Never ever use a good brush with this, but use a specialized tool. I use sticks and things such as that. The bottom ends of paintbrushes, dental picks, things like that. And as you can see, I already painted the masking fluid on here, and now I'm going to take the masking fluid off. The masking fluid protects the white paper or protects whatever you've painted beneath it. So we'll use a masking tool and just rub off the masking fluid. And here we have protected white paper. We're going to go back over here to spray because it just has begun to lose the glisten. And we're going to have to get our trusty hairdryer here, and we're going to spray, and we're going to dry immediately. We're working on splat, and two other ways to make splats are with toothbrush and brush. And if you use a bigger brush or a smaller brush, of course that will influence how large the splat is. So let's get a toothbrush first. I always have toothbrushes around the studio. I'm going to dip it in a little blue here and dilute it. Then I'm going to protect my masking fluid over here and the other areas that we've already gotten. And I'm just going to take the edge of my finger and splat. That's it. That's all you have to do. You do want to, usually you want to use different colors. Now we're going to use a brush. The size brush I use makes a big difference. Obviously a small brush makes a small splat, bigger brush, larger. So let's get a medium sized. Dip it in the paint, and I'm just going to splat. I'll use a rigger. We'll add a little purple in there just for fun, and splat. Next, we're going to use some graded watercolor pencil, and these are some Van Gogh pencils. You can use this technique either on painted paper or unpainted paper, and I took the pencils into the kitchen and just graded them on a kitchen grater. And what I'm going to do is just take these little sprinkles, and in this case, I'm just going to spray them with water. And you'll see the more water I spray on them, the more they dissolve. I can also use a brush if I want to and bring in maybe a little paint into here to outline it. But anyway, this is another way to splatter. And last but not least, we are going to use our fingers to splatter. So what I want to do is cover up with matting this section here, and I'm just going to load my fingers. I'll bring my palette out, and I'm just going to dip my fingers in water, dip them in paint, and just splatter. And there we go. I hope you enjoyed seeing various ways to splatter. And it's great for snow, stars, lichens, foliage. And now I'm going to move on to scratching. And we can scratch our paper too. I've got nails, stick, razor blade, credit card, palette knife, and comb. And what I have to do first is wet all of these areas. And it's best if the glisten has left, because if you wet this too early, what happens is you make an abrasion in the paper and the paint just sucks right in there and you don't have the look you want. So I'm just going to start wetting some of these areas, and we'll let the glisten dry off of them. And this could be wet on wet or wet on dry. The point is that the paper has to be wet. So that's my nails, metal nails, stick. Those are too wet still to work on. So let's just keep moving down and wait for that glisten to leave. I'm going to dip into some brown paint now, some beautiful burnt sienna, which I've mixed a little bit of blue. And now this says razor blade wet, and the one next to it says razor blade dry. So that one will actually have to be dry paint before we can scratch that out. So I'm just wetting all of them, and I'm looking down the line here, and I see that the paint is still glistening, so not quite time to scratch those out. So let's just go ahead and move on down the line. This is credit card, same thing. The glisten has to leave. You can see the glisten's beginning to leave on the first ones that I painted. So let's move down here, and we'll just move on down to palette knife. Notice when I'm brushing, I am using the entire brush. I'm not just using the tip. I'm trying to use that brush from ferrule down to the end. And last but not least, we'll come down here. We'll get all of the paint we have, overlap, overlap, overlap. Flat of the brush, flat of the brush, pushing that paint down. All right. All right. So these are all still a little bit too wet to work on. So give me just a second here to let these begin to dry. I do often use my fingernails, especially when I'm painting in plein air. And what I like about that is that I can get different widths. So that's kind of a fun thing. I can't scratch here. It's too wet. The paper has to be just beginning to dry. You can also use a nail. Either the head of the nail or the point of the nail makes a smaller look. And you can see that makes a nice look. We can use a stick, such as a barbecue skewer. And this was a little too dry. That's why it didn't work yet. We can use a razor blade on damp paper. Notice where it's glistening too wet. But over here where it's beginning to dry, we can do it. I would suggest using several of these techniques if you're going to use them. This is a credit card. You can just take the chopped up end of a credit card and make scratches. This is a palette knife right here. And of course I have all sizes. The metal ones work better. And oh, that had a little red paint on it, which actually is pretty cool. I like that. And then last but not least, just an ordinary hair comb will work. It will, of course, give you more even cuts. Now, once you've done this, the paper is abraded. You can't go back into it, so be sure you really do want to do this. This area is now dry, and if you have a painting where you just need a little piece of light, maybe along a roof line, or some grasses, or maybe there's a light in the window, you can use a razor blade on dry paper as well.